So this is session 2 of Why Jesus Came, the third series of Why Jesus Came. And we've been looking over the last 2 weeks at God's evolving plan to restore human beings to right relationship with Him. And although we've raced through history in about 2 weeks, we've actually covered some thousands of years. So you might say that God does not work in a hurry. God's plan was that Jesus would come into the world as a human being, yet still with the full nature of God. So as Adam and Eve broke that perfect relationship between God and humanity, Jesus brought them together in Himself. And this is now the way in which relationship can be restored. Now we may wonder why it took so long for Jesus to come into the world, but the timing was perfect. And of course we wouldn't expect anything else. The time that Jesus entered the world was a time when the Roman Empire had conquered a large area around the Mediterranean Sea. And one of the features of Rome was that they built roads so that their troops could get from country to country easily, and that was how they kept things in check. But it also benefited the people who lived there, because they were then able to move around freely without fear of being attacked and go from country to country. And this, of course, was very important for the early Christians as they spread the good news. The second thing that made the timing just right was at this stage the Jewish people themselves, and especially those in the area of Galilee. They, and I mentioned yesterday the Pharisees, how particular they were about keeping the law. And so these people had become, well, if you like, pious. And they were very careful about keeping the law and living holy lives. The area of Galilee too had developed a reputation of biblical teaching, good biblical teaching. And the best scholars of the time were teaching in Capernaum. Now every child would have a primary education. They learnt to read and write, but they would learn from the book of the law. Then they could go on, if they wanted to secondary education, where they would learn from the prophets and they would learn to recite huge passages of scripture by heart. The really keen students could then apprentice themselves to a rabbi, and they would follow them around day and night and learn from them till eventually they became teachers themselves. By the time Jesus came into the world, these people had a long history of learning how God acted in their lives. Jesus came to complete the fulfillment of everything that they had learned, everything that was in Scripture. And so these people should have been able to see from their knowledge of Scripture, but also see for themselves and their knowledge of God, that Jesus was God. But Jesus had more to teach them. We read in Mark that He taught in the synagogue in Capernaum, and this is where the best teachers were teaching, and yet we read this. The people were amazed at His teaching because He taught them as one who had authority, not like the teachers of the law. So they could hear that Jesus not only knew His Scripture, but He also knew God. He then astounded them further because a man shouted at, and Jesus told the evil spirit to come out of him, and it did. And then they were amazed again. This is real authority. He just speaks to the evil spirits and they obey Him. You see, the people knew their Scriptures, but they didn't fully know God. Jesus came to fully reveal God to the people, and that's something He'd been preparing for thousands of years, because God's timing is always right. Now we live in a world where everything is immediate, like buy now, pay later, we want it now. Or text me back, communication is instant. And it's very easy for us to get impatient with God. We feel He's made a promise, but it doesn't seem to be happening. But remember, God's timing is always right. Wait on the Lord.
Revealed, the Son of Man.